if you don't think what you're doing, if you ask yourself what I'm doing, would I be embarrassed by this, or would I not want my leader to do that? That's the faux pas. Pay attention to yourself and ask yourself those questions. And that's how I personally try and do things. If I'm doing something and I think to myself, this isn't what I would want my leader to be doing, then it's probably very likely that that's not what your direct reports are going to want to see or hear.
I would say in the civilian world as well. I remember, and I hit the lottery with leadership because from a very young age in business, I learned from really strong leaders that really built a solid foundation. I imagine, like so many leaders that I see out there nowadays, I don't know where they got their leadership training from. And you say 45 to 47 years of age might be the time when people start getting to senior management. They never had any leadership training, like formalized program. I see that out there all the time. It makes me wonder how some people even do survive as leaders. I wonder if you could take us back to something you may have seen. You don't need to name names necessarily, but take us back to an example of some leadership faux pas, or maybe just one example of a leadership misnomer or a faux pas that people may not know about, that it would be helpful for people to learn from someone who has this experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think when I think of those types of things, the one thing I like to remind folks about is we leaders are being judged on everything you're saying and doing at all times, always. It doesn't matter if you're at if you're running a formal meeting. It doesn't matter if you're at some type of retreat. It doesn't matter that if you're out taking everyone out, just going to a restaurant on a Friday afternoon, what you're saying and doing, how you're sitting, when you're speaking, when you're not speaking, everything is being judged, either consciously by your teammates or not. The point is, as the leader, everything you're saying is doing is being judged. And I knew that going through my military career, but I think of when I was a sergeant, I was teaching basic training, and I was the platoon commander for a platoon where in basic training, if someone had failed some type of portion of the training, they would come to our platoon. We would figure out what the challenge was and help that person resolve that, and then get them back onto basic training on another course to succeed and go on with their career. And I remember as a sergeant at that time at that particular location, being a sergeant was a very big deal. You were right in there, and it was the rank. And I remember I'm talking to these 80 or 90 candidates, and I'm in the beginning, I was all full of energy, and I didn't even realize it. But after about a year and a half, I was starting to get kind of bitter with just things that were happening around me. What I didn't notice was that my tone changed, how I was standing changed. Like quite often I would be kind of standing with my, standing evenly on my hips and stuff like that. And my hands would be on my shoulders, and I'd be kind of doing that bit of that power pose thing. And eventually over time, what would happen is I'd be speaking with people, and I would be crossing my arms, and I would be kind of a lot more cross or short with candidates when I'm speaking with them. And some of these candidates had been there for months to figure out what the challenges were. And I didn't realize it, but that was having an effect on the morale inside this platoon. And it was only until a very brave candidate pulled me aside one day and said, "Sergeant Kardynal, are you okay? Is there something going on here?" And I immediately tore this person some not so great, gave them some not so great words. How dare you speak to a sergeant that way? Blah, 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 blah. And they continued. This person was a little bit older, so they had played some life games in the past, and they said, "No, there's something wrong here. I've been here a while, and there's something wrong. I just want to know if you're okay. Maybe you go talk to someone." And I was like, "Wow." I immediately brushed them off, but later in that day, when I had some time to chew on that a bit, I realized that okay, maybe there's something here. And I went back and I spoke to the person. So how are you noticing these things? Because for me, I don't see anything different. They said, no, how you're talking to us has changed, how your tone has changed, how you're standing, all of these different things. And I spoke to a few other candidates that I trusted would be honest with me. And they all said the exact same thing. And I didn't preamble with like, have you noticed, have I been standing differently? I said, hey, have you noticed any differences in all of the platoon staff? I didn't try to just narrow it down on me. And they all said the same thing. So that was a notice for me to say, okay, what I'm saying and doing matters, how I'm saying and doing it matters, and when I'm doing it. And what I realized was that it's all of that all the time. So as a leader, my faux pas would be to say, If you don't think what you're doing, if you ask yourself what I'm doing, would I be embarrassed by this, or would I not like want my leader to do that? That's the faux pas. Pay attention to yourself and ask yourself those questions. And that's how I personally try and do things. If I'm doing something and I think to myself, this isn't how what I would want my leader to be doing, then that's probably very likely that that's not what your direct reports are going to want to see or hear. That was a lot.
I think that was an example of leadership right there. Everything you just did was an example of sharing leadership notes, little tidbits. I hope that the listeners' ears and antennas are up because you just gave us a little masterclass prelude there to leadership. What did anything you want to add to that, or build on that, or recognize about these different levels of leadership that you've just exemplified in the story?
Yeah, well, I think for me, the what I experienced when I went through those things, I remember thinking to myself, said, "Okay, right on, I got this. I'm doing a good job." And then about 2 or 3 weeks later, I kind of settled back into my routines and different things again at work. Things kind of settled down, and by my nature, I'm just a sarcastic type of person. I was making little sarcastic jokes, and I, in my mind, I think everyone just knows I'm just kidding. But again, not cluing in that the influence I had, the position I held, that influence matters, and and understanding the audience that I'm surrounded in. These are very influential, young-ish, depending on the age they join the military. People who know really nothing about the military other than what they may have experienced through life or movies or video games or something. And what I'd noticed was because of the conversations I'd had earlier, I was a little more aware of paying attention to what I was saying and doing, and paying attention to the reactions of people when I was saying and doing what I was doing, how I was doing it. And so I've learned that my sarcasm can be a powerful tool when it's in the right context and the right audience. So I take a little bit of a moment to think about that. And I'd also like to point out, I still make mistakes. Like I certainly didn't capture this leadership knowledge, and then all of a sudden it's a perfect nugget and a piece of gold. I put it aside and I've got it. I'm constantly having to check myself. And even still, years later, that was over a decade ago, and I'm still having to go and say, okay, when I'm in front of groups, how am I standing? Does it make sense for the audience I'm with? And ask those things. So the practical to do advice, if someone's thinking, okay, great, thanks for this information, Simon, but how do I use this? How do I apply this? What I do, and it's only what my thing, I would recommend trying this out, go to the internet, whatever. But what I find is I will actually, when I'm getting ready to stand in front of a group, I'll ask myself some questions. Sometimes I'll even write them out. What is the group? What is my role with the group? What am I thinking about? How can I act? What matters here? And the big one I ask is, what's the message I'm trying to convey?